Marshall. First and foremost, let me hear your take on the question here, Marshall, because, and I think Julius mentioned Robert Mugabe. And Mugabe is a figure that, especially here in the Western world, whenever his name is mentioned, before his name, you hear the dictator. You hear other negative aspect that describes him as a leader. And a few years ago, we heard the then Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, refer to Nigeria and I think Afghanistan as fantastically corrupt. And again, it comes back to the perception that these leaders are the real deal, so to speak, and the African leaders are, the corrupt ones, the ones who are just out for themselves, the ones that leave their citizens impoverished, uneducated, dying of diseases that they need not to die of.
Well, thanks, Johnson. It was great to hear the views of Priscilla and Julius. But my take on the topic of discussion is that it would be to our own detriment as Africa to try and use the Western benchmark of leadership and compare it with ourselves, because we are coming from totally different backgrounds. From a social cultural point of view, it's very different. The environment is very different. Let's not forget that we had colonialism in Africa, where a lot of our countries and societies were subjugated to unprecedented slavery and colonialism for a very long period. So to then compare, say we should measure the success of our leaders in comparison with the Western leaders who benefited from slavery and colonialism, who inherited economies that did not have to be managed to be efficient, it would be detriment to our own progress. But I also want to concur with Priscilla that the fact has been we have been our own undoing factor when it comes to comparative politics. It's an African phenomenon of wanting to compare ourselves with the West and compare our leaders with the West, thinking that that is the right judgment for ourselves. I don't agree with that. I'm not justifying that there's been a lot of incompetence in leadership within Africa itself, perhaps maybe to measure with the successes that have been in the West. But I think there are very good reasons for that, which I have cited, the historical injustices. Let's not forget, I'll use a country like Zimbabwe. Let's not forget that if you look at a country like Zimbabwe, that when we became independent in 1980, we inherited a 6 billion colonial debt that was left by Ian Smith, who was the colonial leader of Southern Rhodesia. So our government, again, are starting at a back foot, where they have to start developing the country and at the same time service the debt that had nothing to do with them. When people talk about the economic challenges in Zimbabwe, they don't remind you about that the government of Zimbabwe in 1980 inherited the 6 billion debt from the previous colonial government. So these are the challenges that we face today, that if we don't put everything into context, we can name and shame ourselves. But the reality is that we have our own destiny in our hands. Yes, we must not look for excuses, but we must remain focused and be the solution to our own problems. Yes, there is a benchmark for African leadership. I think the benchmark for African leadership starts when we compare the dawn of the new African leaders in 1963, when the African Union was formed, the Nkurumas, the Ben Belas, the Julius Nyereres, So that should be our benchmark, where we should measure our leaders of today to say, what happened to those views? What happened to the legacy, which was started by the 32 forefathers, including Haile Selassie and a lot of them. So the issue here is not to look for excuses, but is to thoroughly investigate our history and find the benchmark. I think the benchmark lies in 1963, the core values of the African Union. And let me remind you, Jones, as well, that if you look at the formation of the European Union, they actually borrowed the script from what Kwame Nkrumah had proposed in 1963 to the African leaders, So let's not forget that the ideas have always been with us. The wisdom has always been with us. We had ancient kingdoms and great fortified cities and economies, even long before slavery, that thrived in Africa. Big trade, that thrived. So let's not be quick to dismiss ourselves as a people that we need to look up to the West in terms of qualifying whether we are good leaders or not. But at the same time, let's self-actualize, self-criticize, and come up with the better solutions. And I think we should revisit the Agenda 9 in 1963, look now at how far we've progressed in terms of the AEU vision. It was 2050. I think it was now been moved 2063. I think now, and say how far.
Agenda 2063.
Yeah, Agenda 2063. How far have we performed in leveraging with that? And before I end, I also want to say we have had some good leaders in Africa, and we have had also some very bad and disastrous leaders in Africa. But that does not mean to say we have to over-rely on the West for a benchmark on what good leadership is. We are good enough. I think the diaspora, from a private sector best, a lot of our diaspora have migrated into European economies and are heading big institutions, running governments as well, advising most of those governments. If you go in even to 10 Downing Street, you'd find Ghanaians and Nigerians and Kenyans who are actually working in Westminster and the architects behind the successes of the likes of Boris Johnson and everyone else, and the same in America. So let's not underestimate ourselves or look down upon ourselves. We are a formidable force that just needs to get organized and implement ourselves better.
You've mentioned some of the leaders, the African leaders in the past, which Marshall, you said they should be used as the benchmark. So Jomo Kenyatta, Thomas Sankara, the likes of Kofi Annan, Patrice Lumumba, and Nkrumah. The list goes on. Marshall. But then the question is, so if that's the case, why have the leaders failed to emulate what these past leaders did, or at least what they began to do?
Jones, I think, I don't know if was it my turn to respond, and then, okay. I think the problem we do, Jones, is that we are two-faced sometimes when we analyze our progress, and I think also leadership is spread all over. There's political leadership, there's economic leadership, So I think we need to be very careful when we are looking at, and then there's leadership from a government point of view. There's leadership from a presidential point of view, an individual point of view. So I think we need to be also very careful when we quantify that. Are we talking of leadership economically, politically, socially, at community level? But anyway,
I agree with you. I just want to come in. I agree with you, but the buck stops with the head of affairs. So whoever he let's say for instance, whatever department, whoever's heading a department is the leader of that department, and it trickles down.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you. But let me say that we have had our faults, I admit also, because I don't want to be here to justify everything. We have had challenges, but we have had turbulences. For example, I will use Zimbabwe as a test case. If you look back in our case, that the first 10 to 15 years in Zimbabwe were very successful under Robert Mugabe. There was success in terms of reconciliation. There was success in terms of infrastructure development, empowering the local population to get educated, which within a period of 10 years, we were educated to become the top 3, if not the best, educated within the continent of Africa at that time. Our economy was great and performed even better than Western countries in the 1980s. Yeah, but then come the challenges again of good leadership. That come 1990, through good leadership and foresight, we've educated our people, we've empowered our people in 1990, and now in the 2000, we want to own the means of production. Now we go on the land reform, which triggered sanctions, and then the economic challenges you face in Zimbabwe. So when you look at it from that holistic perspective, without due consent, the West will tell you that Robert Mugabe was a catastrophic failure. But when you actually do fine surgeon and go to the spine, you'll find that there were a lot of positive things that came out from Robert Mugabe's leadership. Let's go across to Nelson Mandela in South Africa. He led very well in terms of bringing reconciliation. He did very well, again, in terms of pushing for Black empowerment, but with a lot of challenges. But again, South Africa stood very well from apartheid to when Mandela transitioned, even with Mbeki coming in. Let's look at Teresa Kam in Botswana. Let's even hope now and jump and touch quite recently the legacy of the late John Pombe Magufuli. It's another success story. We're starting to hear of good stories in terms of infrastructure development in Kenya under Ruto and Uhuru. So half may agree, half may not agree, but that's good leadership. Even if we go to Ghana and look and trace back again from the Nkrumah times to where we are now with Akufo-Addo, the democracy that we have seen in Ghana. These are clear successes that have also happened. But that's not to say we have not had our downside. But I just want to paint our picture that let's not over-exaggerate the progress that we have also made to the detriment of Western heresy sometimes, which they want to define our success. Let's learn to redefine our own success on our own. Yes, we had issues with the Maputos. Yes, we had issues with the way Sankara was removed in Burkina Faso. Those are democratic challenges which we have faced across. And up until today, if we look at the Central African Republic, we have challenges with ethnicity, mismanaged economies. But so far, so good.
Julius?